delighted to welcome you all to today's Roundtable discussion on the impact of implementing e-commerce strategies for platforms in the EAC region. My name is Hidayah Mkwizu. I work with the East Africa Business Council Secretariat, and I welcome you all. It is really a pleasure to have you all here. I'll be the moderator today in this important session with the help from Odo Yaramba from GIZ. I also would like to appreciate GIZ for co-organizing this important roundtable discussion. We have a very exciting agenda today. We'll start by the opening remarks from Mr. Adrian Jau, who is the Acting Executive Director of the East Africa Business Council. And also, this will be followed by the remarks from Ms. Angelique Umulisa, who is the Principal Trade Officer of the EAC Secretariat. We'll then have a key presentation from Mr. Paul Baker, who will give us the overview of how regional e-commerce strategies align with the global efforts with the digital trade protocol. After there, we will have the open discussion on the impact of implementing e-commerce strategies for the platforms in the EAC region. And we kindly request this is the open discussion session, and we request it to be interactive. We'll be glad to hear from different organizations, e-commerce leaders on what are the recommendations, what are your thoughts, what are your challenges that you're facing on e-commerce. Without further ado, I would also like to give you the ground rules before we start our meeting. The first one is we request you to mute your microphones and video when we are not speaking. We also request you to contribute to meeting goals and also stay on point and time. We also request you to focus on the topic. Questions can be sent to the chat room. The meeting will be recorded for reporting purposes, and also the report of the meeting will be shared after this meeting. Therefore, to kick off this meeting, I would like to invite our Acting Executive Director, Mr. Adrian Jau, to give us the opening remarks for this session. Thank you. Karibu Bwana Jau.
Okay, thank you very much, moderator. I think you have already put the ground rules where we wanted to move very fast because this is a virtual meeting. Okay. First of all, I would like to recognize and thank you, Ms. Angelique Umulisa, Principal Trade Officer and Head of International Trade at EAC Secretariat, GIZ team present in this meeting, European Union team who are present here, Expertise French team present, Smart Africa team present in this webinar, esteemed partners, Mr. Paul Baker, CEO, International Economic Consulting Limited, distinguished e-commerce stakeholders and leaders. Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It is with great pleasure that I welcome you today roundtable discussion on the EAC e-commerce platform. It is a privilege to address you as we gather visually to advance a key pillar of our regional development, which is e-commerce. I would like to extend my gratitude to Ms. Angelique Umulisa for gracing this online discussion. our esteemed members, and all of you participants for finding time out of your busy schedule to join us today. Special thanks to the GIZ team for partnering with EABC to organize this important online discussion. Ladies and gentlemen, as all you are aware, in July 2022, the East Africa community took a significant step by adopting the EAC commerce strategy. Today, we gather to build on this milestone to explore the opportunity that lie ahead and to foster deeper collaboration between public and the private sector in the region. These initiatives present us with the extraordinary opportunities to deepen the ties between private and public sectors stakeholders and to harness the technical expertise available in our region. Our gathering today is not just a meeting, but a strategic dialogue aimed at advancing our shared vision for e-commerce in the EAC. I expected that the aim of this discussion today, first is to brief or update on ongoing initiatives in the region, where we will discuss the various e-commerce initiatives in the region, including cross-border e-commerce, digital payments, financial inclusion, and sustainable e-commerce practices. Another aim is to understand private sector experience, as it is vital to listen to private sector success and the challenges in the cross-border e-commerce activities. This insight will inform our collective strategy moving forward and allowing us to take stock of where we have succeeded and where challenges remain and which we need to address. Another objective or aim is to strengthen private sector engagement, as we aim to improve private sector engagement in the development and implementation of the e-commerce initiatives. A key proposal is the establishment of EAC e-commerce forum, or rather a platform. This permanent platform for continuous dialogue and cooperation among stakeholders within the e-commerce ecosystem. Ladies and gentlemen, the e-commerce ecosystem in East Africa is both vibrant and diverse, powered by a range of key stakeholders, including e-commerce platform, delivery services providers, and payment service providers. This diversity is one of our greatest strengths, fuel innovation and growth across the region. However, to fully unlock the potential of e-commerce in East Africa, it is essential for this stakeholder to unite and work together on a common agenda. By speaking with one voice and leverage our collective strengths, we can create a more conducive business environment and investment, driving the sector forward with greater impact. Ladies and gentlemen, today's discussion will not end here. It is like we are starting our journey. We are anticipate a detailed report on the regional e-commerce initiatives, an action plan to bolster private sector engagement, and a formal proposal to establish the e-commerce forum. Additional, we aim to identify the success and challenges experienced by private sector, which will guide us in refining our strategies and moving forward. In concluding, I would like to emphasize that the future of e-commerce in East Africa is bright, but it requires our collective effort to realize its full potential. Let us use the platform today to exchange ideas, forge partnership, and set the course of prosperous and digitally empowered East Africa. I look forward to fruitful discussion ahead and to working together toward seamless, inclusive, and sustainable e-commerce ecosystem in our region. Asante sana and welcome for discussion. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Njau. I just got a quote from you that our gathering today is not just a meeting, but a strategic dialogue aimed at advancing our shared vision of e-commerce in the East Africa community. Thank you very much. And I have seen you say that the aim is to get the brief of the ongoing initiatives, understanding the private sector experiences, and also to strengthen our private sector engagement on the e-commerce. Thank you very much. Without taking much of your time, I would also like to welcome now Ms. Angelique Umulisa from the EAC Secretariat for also a brief welcoming remarks. Thank you very much. Karibu sana, Ms. Angelique.
Thank you very much, moderator. And good morning to you all. I'd like to recognize the acting executive director of EABC, GIZ officials, EU, expertise France, as had been mentioned by EABC. So basically, I will write on the protocols observed by the acting executive director of EABC. And I wish to thank the EABC and GIZ for organizing these important roundtable discussions for platforms. I look forward to an interactive dialogue and more insights on how e-commerce platforms can contribute to the e-commerce development in the region. Ladies and gentlemen, the digital transformation is reshaping how businesses operate globally, and EAC is no exception. With a rapidly growing internet penetration, a youthful population of over 60% of the population, and an increasing appetite for online services, the potential for e-commerce in this region is immense. As you have seen, many companies have reorganized their businesses to make use of e-commerce, indicating the potential for companies in the region to enhance and re-engineer production and trade, and also diversify their supply chains. And the expanding tech sector within the region owes much credit to various initiatives that have been undertaken to enable mobile penetration, the broadband connectivity, and initiatives such as the One Area Network, in which most partner states are participating in. And these advancements have reshaped communication, collaboration, financial integration, spurring a number of tech startups and entrepreneurial ventures. Yet, despite these strides, we still have significant gaps that persist due to affordability, skills gap, limited broadband infrastructure, electricity, limiting uptake, internet use, among other challenges. And where e-commerce has taken off in some of the partner states, there are still challenges that are seen, such as poor enforcement of of some regulations, including consumer protection, low access to transactions frameworks, high cost of delivering services, expensive cross-border. Nevertheless, the steadfast in its pursuit to cultivate a business environment conducive for growth and prosperity. In July 2022, the EAC adopted a regional e-commerce strategy spanning over 10 years with the vision of having inclusive use of e-commerce by consumers, businesses, and the public sector through e-commerce enabled businesses within the EAC. The strategy identified quite a number of measures, 60 of them have been prioritized, some of which are now under implementation. Others are planned soon with the support of various partners, including GIZ, EU, the World Bank, and the like. For example, we have already developed regulations on consumer protection, which and are expected to be finalized by end of this year. By 2028, we expect to have harmonized a number of e-commerce enabling regulations and even developed regional frameworks and guidelines on areas such as cybersecurity, data protection, and cross-border data flows, interoperability of payment systems, e-signature, intermediary liability guidelines focused on online platforms, harmonization also of digital taxation rules. All these are now work in progress. And so we hope that by 2028, we should be having these tangible outputs. In addition, we are working on enhancing and expanding the One Network area to fully implement not only the voice roaming, but also data roaming. We will soon embark on the development of a policy and regulatory framework to remove barriers and promote business environment for private investment in digital infrastructure, as well as greening of digital infrastructure and services. And not to forget that we also plan to enhance capacity and digital skills among the stakeholders, including government officials and the private sector. Therefore, today's roundtable will be a very opportunity in understanding the challenges faced by platforms, the successes they have, also getting insights and ideas on appropriate actions and solutions that can be implemented to accelerate e-commerce growth and create jobs and also drive economic development across the community, and also beyond, taking advantages of opportunities such as the AFCFTA, that's the African Continental Free Trade Area. Importantly, the formation of an e-commerce forum comprising of stakeholders such as yourself will be vital to enable participation, particularly from the private sector, in the EAC policy forums. The outputs coming through, would be considered by various forums we have within the EAC structures, such as the EAC e-commerce engagement platform. And your expertise on these matters would be very important, so that obviously targeted actions can be taken, and in a bid to address common challenges that are being faced across the region. So I look forward to the discussions today, and wish you all fruitful deliberations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Angelique, for the very insightful remarks. And I heard about consumer protection, One Network area, and consumer protection that is to be finalized by the end of this year. But I also got some quotes from you that you really look forward to see what are the challenges and successes, insights and ideas from the private sector, especially the platforms, on what they are facing during the e-commerce cross-border. So thank you very much. Without further ado, I would like to invite Mr. Odo Yaramba from GIZ to give us just a few remarks before we proceed. Thank you.
Yes, yes, thank you very much. I really don't have much to say other than thanking everyone for being able to participate. So, as we all know, the e-commerce services depend on a big variety of stakeholder ecosystem, and it makes sense that we all get together and shape our strategies and opinions together on different topics. And this gathering makes sense naturally to happen, especially now that after COVID, we are seeing some movement on e-commerce in the region. So it is really good that now we start getting together and finding ways to improve our collaborations. So that's what I can say in brief. Thank you very much. Back to you, Hidayah.
Thank you very much, Mr. Odo. I would like also to request you to proceed as we move forward with the presenter. So I would like you to proceed with our program from here. Welcome.
Okay, thank you very much. I would like to invite Paul Becker to make your presentation. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much for inviting me to speak at this roundtable. It's really a pleasure to be here. First of all, as well, just to recognize Adrienne Anjou, who's the acting director of EABC, for the opening. Thank you very much for the opening remarks, and Hidayo Mkwizu as well for facilitating and moderating the whole session. Marie-Angelique Umulisa at the EAC Secretariat for your opening remarks as well. Odo, thank you very much. We've been partnering on the PECI program to try and support EAC on the e-commerce strategy, the implementation of the e-commerce strategy. So thank you very much for inviting me. All colleagues that are joining from the EU, Expertise France, Smart African Alliance, and specifically as well the private sector participants that this workshop is really geared towards. I saw that we have logistics providers as well as platform CEOs that are also participating, as well as other private sector colleagues. So it's truly a pleasure to be here to speak a little bit about not only the e-commerce strategy at the regional level, but what is also happening further afield that will also impact on international trade, cross-border trade for e-commerce and also digital transactions in the future. Just very briefly, I am chairman of International Economics Consulting and of the Africa Trade Foundation. I'm also a member of the expert working group at the World Economic Forum on digital flows and technologies for trade. So how to best use the private sector to best use technologies for trade and creating an enabling environment to facilitate cross-border trade. I've also worked with the Smart African Alliance on the continental blueprints for e-payments, and there is a forthcoming blueprint that we are working on at Smart African Alliance for e-commerce for Africa, particularly taking advantage of the opportunities through the protocol on digital trade. And I've also worked with the African Union on the harmonization of rules around digital trade for cross-border digital trade and creating a regional harmonization strategy for regulations. And then also worked with other international organizations like UNCTAD, UNECA, and the ACFT Secretariat itself in terms of advancing negotiations and rules around digital trade. So I am a digital trade and more of a trade economist as a background, but now moved into the digital trade space. And I will be giving you this perspective in terms of what are the opportunities, but also how the private sector might need to respond to some of the new emerging requirements that exist in digital trade or cyberspace, the cyberspace economy. So what I will start off with in the presentation, I will not try to be too long because the idea is to try and give you some sort of pragmatic talking points as to what we need to consider as the private sector in terms of moving forward at the regional level. And then the idea is to indeed get some discussions as to what the EABC and the Secretariat can also work towards to improve that enabling environment in moving forward, perhaps removing certain inconsistencies or certain barriers that still exist to being able to trade intra-regionally. So first I will start with what is happening at the global level. So this is setting the scene in terms of what is the framework that is governing international trade more widely than just at the regional level. Then we will be looking at the specific continental initiatives that are taking place that are also shaping these rules. And I will give you a little bit of a sort of personal interpretation of what that might mean for businesses. Then we will move to the AFCFTA. There's a lot that's being discussed around the AFCFTA, and this year they concluded a protocol on digital trade itself. So that certain countries now have made, well, countries have made commitments around certain issues, which we will present in this short presentation. And then finally, just to conclude with what are the key implications for platform providers and those that are engaged in digital trade more generally. But there are rules that are affecting any types of online businesses. So it even affects, I saw that DHL is amongst us, it even affects as well, the actual business of all companies of all shapes and sizes. So just to start off, at the global level, there is the World Trade Organization that member states work through the World Trade Organization to establish certain sets of rules and an understanding of what is the trading environment. At the WTO level, they have been discussing e-commerce for a number of years. Since 1998, there's been a work program. But at that level, where all the member countries of the WTO come together to set the rules, there hasn't been any major progress that's ever been achieved, except with regard to not introducing any new types of duties for electronic transmissions. So they call this the moratorium on electronic transmissions. And what it means is that you cannot discriminate between countries that are sending information through digital channels and tax them differently at this stage. That moratorium, it was lasting for 2 years, and it just got updated again in the latest ministerial conference in February of this year. So we have another 2 years on which the moratorium will continue. So there are no duties on electronic transmissions until March 2026, unless ministers come together to abandon the moratorium. So whichever comes earlier, the moratorium could end up being reversed. So there hasn't been much progress at the World Trade Organization level. So what has happened is that countries have got together under a plurilateral agreement. So that means that not all members of the WTO are party to this particular agreement. And they've been advancing more quickly in negotiations to try and set the rules for e-commerce. And this map is showing what are the countries, so those that are colored are the countries that were part of the Joint Statement Initiative since the beginning. It started about 5 years ago, and it got concluded in July of this year. What you'll see is that some countries are in blue and some countries are in yellow. The countries in yellow are those that actually remove themselves from committing to the Joint Statement Initiative text that came out in July of this year. They were, for various reasons, have decided to opt out. And the ones in blue have actually opted in. So we see, for example, Kenya has become a signatory of that Joint Statement Initiative. And what it does is that it already sets for those particular countries a certain framework of openness, but also regulations and protection for consumers. And they've all agreed to a common set of rules amongst these countries. The idea, of course, is that it will make trade much easier between those that are in blue, because they will have recognized legislative frameworks that try and support e-commerce across them. They've also decided to extend this idea of a moratorium, so there will be no any duties applied to electronic transmissions cross-border. So this very briefly is what is contained in the joint statement initiative. It's very recent. It came out, it was adopted last month. Countries can always join it later, so it's not that it's a closed club. So at some point we may see other EAC countries deciding to join the joint statement initiative. What it does, though, it opens up these markets to these requirements for all other markets as well. So they make a commitment that they will abide by these particular rules. And so the way that the text has been framed is there are different measures within the text which try and enable e-commerce. So they try and foster and promote more flows, cross-border flows. There are other elements which are more about creating a trust and so protecting the rights of consumers, but also against potential cyber attacks. Then we have some provisions that are relating to the competitiveness of telecommunication providers. So that's the backbone, of course, of digital trade. We also have some provisions that are really related to data itself and the availability of data cross-border. And then we have some transparency and cooperation provisions so that countries try and use their lessons learned or best practices to help other countries. And then, as usual, in all these types of agreements, we have certain exceptions to the agreement. When we look at the AFCFTA protocol, we will see some of these exceptions. But in this case, there are certain rights, for example, of indigenous people that can still be protected and allow countries to actually not apply all of these measures equally for all different types of segments of the population. There are certain personal data protection requirements, for example, that need to be localized, that also are carved out of this particular agreement. So it's a major agreement, and the reason I wanted just to discuss it is that because I'll be talking about the AFCFTA Digital Trade Protocol, it actually resembles quite closely in many ways what the Joint Statement Initiative structure looks like as well. So it's quite nice to compare the two. And as I say, Kenya is already a member of this JSI, and there's 3 countries in West Africa that also have joined the JSI. So as the talks at the WTO haven't really progressed as much as what countries would like, or at least some like-minded countries wanted to move quicker on agreements, what has happened is that we've not only got a plurilateral agreement, the Joint Statement Initiative, we've also got a series of bilateral agreements that now incorporate e-commerce chapters. It started around 20 years ago, the first e-commerce chapter, but now what we're seeing is much more sophisticated chapters, much more comprehensive in scope, that are also embedded in trade agreements, particularly when it comes to North-South and North-North agreements, so more developed countries and less developed countries. We see these kinds of provisions now being incorporated into the FTAs. And so often we see they're standalone chapters, and they will cover many of the modern elements of a trade agreement that we will see in the AFCFTA as well. What you can't really probably read, unfortunately, on the slide is that chart is showing what kind of provisions are used in these agreements most frequently. And so for things like data protection, consumer protection come up as the highest number of mentions in these types of agreements. Also, unsolicited commercial messaging is normally not allowed, and governments need to take great care to try and ensure that it doesn't happen. These kinds of elements are incorporated in the agreement. What is still quite rare to be incorporated into the agreement is elements with regards to, say, standards and say, encryptioning standards for countries to adopt. Also, government data, open government data, is not usually considered in these agreements. Sometimes also electronic transaction frameworks are still missing in the agreements. So we do see quite a variety of ambition still emerging from these types of digital economy agreements that are coming out. And just to say, the European Union and Asia Pacific are really leading the way in terms of making commitments in this particular area. We already heard in the opening statements from the EAC, we heard already that, of course, Africa is embracing digital transformation. Of course, that was accelerated with COVID, but we are seeing really the emergence of a strong digital economy. It still doesn't get recorded properly in countries, so we don't really know the size of the economy or how much it's growing, but we know that it is present, and a lot of businesses are now using digital channels to be able to reach customers, but also to manage their supply chains. According to the stats that we have, e-commerce is growing at around 10%. It will be growing around 10% a year until the end of this decade. It is expected to grow to around $56 billion in 2029. That's just in the African continent. These numbers sound quite significant, but it represents around 1% of the global market in e-commerce. So Africa is still very, very much underrepresented in terms of the size of the digital economy, and it has, in that sense, a lot of room still to grow. So having rules around how one can emerge stronger in the digital economy is also why these rules are being crafted. But it's also because countries have different rules, and we want to make sure that they're able to be recognized and being able to trade with each other. So at the African level, there is this recognition of the need to create more harmonized rules, more harmonized frameworks, and ensuring that trade can flow freely between countries. And so there are many, many initiatives. It's a little bit overwhelming, the amount of initiatives out there. But I've just highlighted here on the slide a few of them. Some of them are more committing. So the countries at the African Union level have adopted and ratified some of these instruments. And in other cases, it's more like strategies and plans to try and promote more trust or more trade in this particular area. So the first interesting document from the African Union is the Digital Transformation Strategy for Africa. It's a 10-year plan, which has been endorsed by all the different member states. It has different foundational pillars, such as creating an enabling environment, ensuring that the policy and regulatory framework is both facilitating but also protecting the rights of individuals and businesses, looking at digital infrastructure, digital skills and human capacity to embrace digital initiatives, digital innovation, and entrepreneurship. And they've identified within the transformation strategy certain key critical sectors that they also view as being drivers of digital transformation. So these are the digital industry itself, looking at financial services, digital government, digital education, digital health, and digital agriculture. So these are seen as the spearheading sectors that will drive the African continent forward. There are some cross-cutting themes in that transformation strategy that are important and that re-emerge in the African Continental Free Trade Area. Things like digital content and applications, digital IDs, emerging technologies, cybersecurity, privacy and personal data protection, and research and development are crafted within the strategy to try and support the whole digital ecosystem in the continent. So these specific themes have been reused in the protocol as well. Another important initiative is the Malabo Convention. It was adopted in 2014, but it needed a sufficient number of countries to ratify it before it came into force. And so it only came into force last year. So it took a decade to come into force. And still there are not that many countries, of course, across Africa that have ratified the Malabo Convention. It focuses very much on creating the right regulatory framework for electronic transactions. So the recognition of electronic documents as equals to the paper documents. It also focuses on data protection, particularly safeguarding personal data. And then finally, ensuring that there is a framework in place to protect against countries against cyber threats, which have been, of course, on the rise as well across the continent. The other important framework is the data policy, EU data policy framework. That here is focusing very much on the value of data that data can represent, and it has a number of provisions, or a number, sorry, of recommendations in it that center around cooperation, fairness, and inclusiveness, as well as trust, safety, and accountability in the use of data. The interoperability framework for digital ID is important for the platforms, of course. This enables platforms to, for example, APIs from platforms to be mined as well for data. It enables also in payments, for example, for different payments providers to be able to seamlessly interact with different platforms because of common standards around digital IDs. And of course, it's the security and the trust around digital IDs that are also figuring within this interoperability framework. And then finally, there's the protocol on digital trade, which countries have also adopted this year in February. It isn't completed because there are still certain annexes that need to be finalized. And I'll go through this protocol in a little bit more depth so that it's clear to everybody what it really contains. And what kind of change it might make in different countries. I just kept one other area which isn't necessarily at the African Union level, but this is Smart Africa, which carries out many initiatives. So they carry out different blueprints in different areas that are important for the digital economy. So as I say, there is a new e-commerce blueprint that will come out at the end of the year. That is trying to promote recommended approaches for countries to adopt to try and create a harmonized framework for cross-border e-commerce markets. And so it makes a number of recommendations and some pilot projects between countries to try and move forward in terms of improving cross-border trade. But they also have other types of blueprints, as I said, around payments, but also the ICT industry, skills development. They also have a new a digital ID platform that would enable platforms that aren't connected to be seamlessly interoperable through an intermediary platform itself. So there are a number of initiatives taking place, and at the regional economic community level at the EAC, we have, for example, the strategy that was adopted in 2022 also has many of the measures needed to ensure that regional cross-border trade can happen, and when there are any conflicts, how they can get resolved, and also ensuring that throughout that there is the protection of the consumers at the heart of all these measures. In terms of the AFCFTA, then, as I say, it's a very new agreement. It's just been adopted. It hasn't, as I say, been completed. And what it is to try, the objective of the protocol is to try and create this unified single African digital market at the end of it. So it contains many different types of chapters and provisions that would actually enable us to boost intra-African digital trade to move forward. Just to say, the protocol does not apply to government procurement. So that has been carved out. So everything within the protocol does not apply to government transactions. And it also, it doesn't apply to information that's either held or processed either by or on behalf of the state parties as well. So it doesn't have to apply. The different set of rules are still allowed to be applied to them. Also, just to highlight for those who have got a more of a legal slant on this, is that it allows countries still allows them to regulate still, to self-regulate under certain conditions. So when there are considerations of safeguarding public welfare or promoting, for example, sustainable development, as well as essential security interests and pursuing public policy objectives, countries are allowed to deviate from the commitments made under the Digital Trade Protocol. And of course, it can be contested by another party, and there's a dispute settlement system to discuss any types of disputes. And then that body would decide whether it was indeed a legitimate public policy objective as to what was pursued for deviating from the AFCFTA's protocol. The protocol defines, of course, what is digital trade, and perhaps for us all to be clear, this is about digitally enabled transactions for either trade in goods or trade in services that can either be delivered digitally or physically, and that involve a natural or juridical person. So the transactions themselves are digitally handled, but the delivery of the service or the good, as we see at the moment in an e-commerce platform, it happens physically through logistics providers. That is considered to be digital trade. So pretty much everything that you are currently engaging in as private sector is taking place under this particular definition, and therefore is affected by this protocol on digital trade. So it has these different chapters. One is looking at market access. So that's enabling cross-border trade to happen because there are no barriers in the other market to be able to access that market. There are then a set of measures that are really trying to facilitate trade, promote trade, as we saw in the joint statement initiative. Then there are a series of measures which are about data governance, so that's protecting the rights and ensuring that data is safe. Then there is about creating business and consumer trust to engage in digital trade. Then there are two other pillars which are less committing in language. So they're more about promoting efforts in this area or cooperating in this area. And this is with regard to creating digital inclusion, so leaving nobody behind, both at the individual society level, but also at the level of companies. Smaller companies may face greater difficulties in engaging in digital trade, and that's why we don't want to leave them behind, and also improving the workers' skills in this particular area. And then there is another pillar which is looking at emerging technologies and innovation. And the definition of what is emerging technologies is still to be done. There will be an annex to the protocol that will define what are emerging technologies. But the idea is that within this particular pillar, these kind of technologies would not face any tariffs to be able to be accessed, or non-tariff measures would also be streamlined, at least, to facilitate trade in ICT goods. It would also liberalize trade for ICT services, and ideally promote investment and regulations to create competition in the ICT sector. As I mentioned, it's such a critical backbone. If the ICT, the broadband environment doesn't work properly, then it breaks down the entire opportunities from digital trade. So just to go, I will only go through the first 4 columns because I think the pillars, because they are the most, I think, critical in terms of the commitments made by countries. And there is a very strong direct relationship that these have with the private sector. So the first one is about market access. So this is, as I say, the ability to reach other markets. The protocol itself will define where the digital products are originating from. And in terms of that annex, it's still being negotiated. It's a very difficult thing to do, and I'm not quite clear how they're going to come up with these sets of rules. The only country that has really defined such rules is South Africa in trying to promote this. Most countries believe it's too difficult to be able to define the origin of a digital product, since the digital nature of the product is already in the cloud. But anyway, there will be these sets of rules, and the idea is that you can distinguish where it comes from. And why would we want to distinguish where it comes from? It's so that we can actually apply certain customs duties to those that are not from the continent. So it would enable us, for example, to introduce a differential treatment if there is a service, a digital service that is being transmitted from China as opposed to from South Africa. So the second point here is that there will be no customs duty within the continent. So there is no duties to be applied to electronic transmissions across the continent. But such duties could be applied, as I say, against those emitters of information from other markets outside of the continent. Customs duties, and they make it very clear, that doesn't stop you from still collecting what you currently collect as internal taxes. So as long as there is something called national treatment, that you don't differentiate between foreign and local suppliers, they can face the same level of taxation. So value-added taxes, for example, is allowed to be applied on any types of digital services that happen cross-border. And these kinds of taxes are already collected quite frequently by most countries in the world already. And then the last point here on digital market access is that we don't treat products differently. So there's non-discrimination of digital products if they are considered to be like products. So, for example, we can't require additional standards to be met from a product that comes from abroad, because we could, if they are similar to the same products that we are having domestically. So we have to treat products equally, and we are not allowed to differentiate just because of the technology embodied in the product either. There's a technology neutrality provision also embedded in the agreement. So these are quite critical. We have similar provisions if it came to trading goods, where we cannot differentiate between like products in goods either, and say that a car is different because it comes from China. As long as it meets the same standards as a South African car, they should be treated equally. But of course, duties can differ from the origin. The second pillar is quite comprehensive. It's looking at trying to facilitate digital trade. And here there are a number of areas that is trying to facilitate it. So first of all, it's the legal validity of e-documents and e-trust services. So it enables, it's creating the framework for an enabling environment of adopting e-signatures across countries. And the kind of language that's included in it, it means that it's not telling you what kind of a system you have to have in place, but a system needs to exist and it needs to be legally recognized. But parties are free to choose how to implement all of these provisions in the agreement. And so here, the authentication methods for example, electronic signatures and even more sophisticated digital signatures, these can still be set by the countries, but they need to have a system in place for that recognition and setting the standards around that. It also promotes things like paperless-based documents. Most countries are already moving forward with that, and they've made other commitments to the World Trade Organization on trade facilitation. That means that these paper documents are being converted into digital documents. But there are still certain documents that sometimes require, for example, a physical stamp, and it still hasn't covered all the different documents. So sometimes, for example, a bill of lading might still need to be physical in nature. So the idea here is to move towards a fully digitalized system that we don't need any paper-based documents either. And then also using e-payment channels to be able to make the payments as well. So there is encouragement, enhancing access to and participation in the development of e-payment systems across the parties. It encourages e-voicing.
Paul,
sorry. Yes.
Paul, can you hear me?
I can hear you.
So yes, I suggest you move a bit faster. Okay. So that we can give time also for reaction.
Absolutely.
I don't know if you have a way of. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
I can move quickly. Yes. So thank you, Odo. So it encourages e-contracting and e-voicing. So that means again digital ways to ask for payments. Digital IDs, it promotes recognition of different regimes and promotes interoperability. It ensures that there is a legal framework. Countries have to adopt a legal framework for electronic records as well. So the recognition of this in national courts, and it should be aligned to international standards, particularly model laws, which are mentioned in the protocol. It has to promote the infrastructure, but the language here is promote, therefore there is no binding obligation. And again, here, once again, we have interoperability and mutual recognition of standards. Just quickly, the other two pillars I wanted to come to is on data governance. I think that's more familiar with most private sector operators. Here is about promoting cross-border data transfers and ensuring that there aren't, say, localization requirements for cross-border data transfers, unless, again, there is a public security objective as to why that is the case. And it encourages the public sector of different states to ensure that there is a sufficient level of protection for data. Then there's data protection, which we're, I think, quite familiar with through the GDPR of the EU, for example, and many countries have tried to align more to the GDPR, but we also have the Malabo Convention at the continental level that countries have aligned to. Again, on location of computing facilities, here there is no requirement to locate computing facilities in a specific country, with certain carve-out exceptions for security purposes. And then the last one is about promoting data innovation, but it's a very flimsy, very loose language, which doesn't really commit countries to very much. The final area of interest is, particularly for platforms, for example, is that one of the commitments of countries here is that there is no requirement to transfer source code or algorithms, for example, to the government. These are proprietary intellectual properties of the platforms themselves, and they are not allowed. So countries are not allowed to force or to try and extract information around that. Except again, if there is a specific legal requirement to do so, because there is a investigation set up by an independent inquiry, for example. Cybersecurity, parties have to ensure that there is cybersecurity, a legal framework in place, plus systems to try and combat that. It's again very loose language, so it doesn't tell you exactly how to do it. And then other areas on consumer trust protection. Consumer protection is requiring countries to have a consumer protection law in place and to have the necessary institutions to apply that law. They also require that unsolicited emails, there are measures against unsolicited emails in their jurisdiction. And then it promotes a safe environment as well. Again, the language here is less definitive. And my last slide, and sorry for taking so long, is just to try and to say what needs to happen in terms of the private sector in consideration of this new protocol on digital trade. It will take some time before it starts getting implemented. But first of all, this is good news in terms, my first bullet is about the business environment. It will facilitate transformation towards digital and paperless-based transactions. It will help in terms of logistics and trade facilitation, and of course the optimization of all of this through the automation of data gathering that is possible through these digital platforms. It does create new business opportunities, particularly around services. It creates more guaranteed rules when we're doing cross-border trade with other countries. And of course, there is the whole ecosystem of services that needs to exist in Africa that doesn't currently exist, that will need to be established. And so that's in itself an industry as well. And then the last area, though, which is perhaps a little bit harder to bear, is that there will be compliance costs related to this. So these rules require countries to adhere to certain practices that they might not be doing yet. And so we're all familiar with the need to appoint a data protection officer, to have a data policy now within companies. to ensure that there is a data protection mechanism in place, return policies for platforms. All of these things are now going to be added requirements that will create more trust, which is a long-term benefit, but in the short term, of course, has certain implications for the businesses. And then finally, on taxation, that's something that reoccurs a lot. Countries are still trying to know how to improve collection around taxation, and that's likely to lead, I think, to a little bit extra burden for businesses in moving forward. Thank you very much, Odo, and participants, and happy to share in the next deliberations.
Yes, thank you very much, Paul. Thank you for giving us a lot of good news. That the moratorium to exempt taxes for non-physical goods, increase in trade facilitation for e-commerce for physical goods, and also increasing certainty and legal arrangements for service providers and users who are using e-commerce services. And that, of course, will increase more business opportunities and increase transactions to the percentages that you've shown to us. So I'm sure there's already many questions that are ready to be asked to different people who gave us your remarks and presentations. I suggest you write the questions down. We do one more presentation from the AE trade group, so they can give us practical experience of cross-border e-commerce in the EAC. I hope you can make your presentation short. Then we start asking our questions and giving reactions. So from our AE Trade Group, the Chief Operations Officer, Mr. Jack, please take the floor and give your presentation as short as you can, if possible, so that we can now start dialogue. Thank you.
Good morning, Mr. Odo, and it's a pleasure to be here with you today. In fact, I'm the commercial director of AE Trade, not the COO. I'm based in Mauritius, and I look after trade facilitation platform for the AE Trade Group. So I'm happy Mr. Paul Baker has covered almost everything. We are aligned with AFCFTA. In fact, we are the technical implementation partner of AFCFTA, and we are engaging with many stakeholders across Africa, the continent, to facilitate inter-African trade. So experience is good. Countries are well aware now of all the rules, regulations, and protocols. And in fact, we are very practical. So we want to really get engaged into the connecting trade between the member states under the AFCFTA protocol. So what we're doing currently across Africa and even in the Indian Ocean, we are connecting countries onto our platform, which is a Sokuku.Africa platform, which was launched in 2018. So today we are engaged in many ways under the AFCFTA protocols, and we have established the intra-continental platform, which we are inviting many countries to join in. So we have an approach where we are phasing it out. We're starting with 15 countries, and I can't give you the list right now, but we have started with 15 countries, and we're slowly, gradually going to hit the 55 countries across Africa, which might take 5 to 10 years, but it depends how fast we moved. But it's very important, based on the figure I've heard about the 56 billion revenue that we are generating on e-commerce. Globally, it's very small, 1%. So I think everybody, all the stakeholders should put their heads together, and we'll try and make it happen, because the future of Africa depends on the digital trade. So I'll stop here. We'll continue with some more questions later. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much. Yeah, it's good to hear that your business is doing good. I'm sure you'll get more questions and reactions from other businesses that are present here in the meeting. So if there's any reactions now or questions, please raise your hand or post your question in the chat and indicate whom the question is addressed to. Yes, Maurice.
Thank you, Odo. Yeah, my name is Morris. I work for DHL Express, based in Nairobi. I have a question, and thank you for that good presentation. I have a question on what's the plan for making sure SMEs and an organization which is supposed to benefit is conversant or they know how to benefit from this trade agreement or trade agreements. It's like what plans are there to make sure they know and they know how to go about it and they are able to capitalize on the benefits. Thank you.
Yes. This question, maybe I'll first give a chance to the East African Business Council to answer, and then I can also chip in. Mr.
Thank you.
Yes, go ahead. Yes.
Thank you very much, Odo. And thank you, Maurice, for your question. Maybe just to answer it, we are really trying our best to train SMEs, and with different donors as EABC, we have been doing the sensitization workshops for the SMEs. Like now we have the sensitization workshop that is funded by the EU TAF, whereby we are training SMEs on the how to export and how to use these digital platforms. So I just wanted to put it clear that we are also doing our best on the sensitizing the SMEs. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe to also to add to what Hidaya is saying. So normally there is dialogues. There's public and private dialogues that are organized by the institutions in charge of getting feedback from the private sector and also the public sector. So there is the SFTA Secretariat, there is the ESC Secretariat, we have the ESC Business Council. They normally invite the private sector in these dialogues through the Ministry of Trade and Ministry of Regional Corporations, and then meetings happen to discuss a specific topic. So usually the business associations and the chambers of commerce are invited, and they should be able to consult with businesses on ongoing on the specific topic at hand. So we know that sometimes maybe the information doesn't reach properly, or it comes through a lot of other communication, daily business communications, and maybe some opportunities might not be recognized at the business level, so to attend, which is why we also need to discuss in this meeting to see how best we can now do this, given that now, I mean, if you see all the initiatives that Paul presented, there's a lot going on. So how can we then best keep track of what's happening and discuss ahead of time to understand what are the positions of our ecosystem on each different topic. So I don't know, Maurice, if you want to, if you are satisfied with the answer.
Yeah, I think that is satisfactory.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Please ask more questions or give us more reactions. In the meantime, I want to ask Mr. Paul Becker, maybe from your knowledge or any other institution present, what are the practices in other areas like in Asia, for example, or in Europe, to make sure that the private sector really is able to identify upcoming opportunities and be able to shape opinions ahead of time on different things. For example, if it's consumer protection, you want to know ahead of time as an ecosystem, as an, let's say, for example, ESC community, to say businesses in the ESC communities, online platforms, for example, to say, where do we stand in terms of ABC topics under consumer protection, and how are we going to defend our standing during decision making? Maybe Paul can touch on that, or anyone else who wants to react on that. Then Victor, you can ask your questions after that. Thank you.
Thanks, Odo. Yeah, no, just it's a good question. First of all, I think in terms of APEC is a good example. I think the Asia Pacific Economic Community, is very much a private sector driven initiative. Of course, governments commit to certain measures at that level as well. But we have an e-commerce working group that is made up primarily of the private sector, that determines what it is that they want to see in place to try and enable, for example, cross-border transfer of flows or data markets. And so it is more private sector driven, and they are relatively well organized and well resourced to be able to do so. One of the things that you're quite right, Odo, is the private sector needs to first of all be aware of what there is out there. One criticism I have is that the AFCFTA Secretariat hasn't published the protocol. It came out in February. We are now 6 months since it came out, and it hasn't been officially published. The only version that's available online is a leaked version. Then there is also, of course, all of the annexes that need to be completed still. How much the private sector has been engaged in the negotiations is perhaps also debatable. And so the private sector should be driving, indeed, the commitments that are taken by countries, because this will affect the private sector. The trade negotiations are always, of course, led by the government. It's not the private sector that actually commits a country to something, but the private sector has to have a very strong voice in articulating what it's looking for and what kind of protections it might need as well. And I think that hasn't always happened very much evenly across Africa. So I think that's something that needs to be improved in the future. And as this text is still subject to some potential revisions, it would be important for the private sector to be organized. So one example could be indeed the EABC to carry out public advocacy, coordination meetings of the private sector, and set out a position document as to what the EAC private sector would like to see in different negotiations. It won't stop here. There will be future negotiations with other parties, and there's negotiations at the World Trade Organization level. So there are still plenty of opportunities to get engaged, I think, as the private sector. Thanks.
Yes, thank you. Thank you very much. Yeah. So before we move to, sorry, I hear.
Yaramba, you said I would come in.
Yes, please ask your question, please.
Really, mine is not entirely a question, and thank you for this, being engaged in digital trade consultations, especially we saw the need during COVID, at the peak of COVID in 2020. And back here in Kenya, we implemented a project known as e-commerce booster program. We supported 2,600 plus SMEs who had no footprint on the digital space at all. And when there was the barriers to physical contacts, all those protocols, and customers could not come in person. So we really saw the need to heighten digital trade. But listening to Paul in his presentation, I kept wondering, because these are things that we've been dealing with at a policy level, stuff to do with the infrastructure, especially internet connectivity, power supply within the region, the digital infrastructure generally, to be able to implement the digital trade protocols that Paul was presenting. We are talking about opportunities that there are, given that we're just 1% of global trade, but I think we need to delve much more deeper in how we are going to address the challenges to implementing digital trade protocol. So the digital infrastructure within the region, those limitations, I think is something we need to agree on how we're going to implement it to ensure that the infrastructure is there. The second thing that I think has also been clouding our minds is the sorting out the regulatory alignment, given that the different countries have varying regulations and standards for digital trade. Is there appetite for us to sort out regulatory alignment throughout the continent? Because this is really making it difficult to create a unified framework that all the partner states in Africa would adhere to. So that's a very important area, doing the regulatory scanning of all the 55 countries, checking which ones are aligned and how do we promote alignment. I think that's the second thing that we need, because those opportunities are there as we are saying them, but unless we sort out these challenges, really they'll continue remaining opportunities for a very long period. Cybersecurity threat is a third one, which is a living threat that we have to live with. And we are really very vulnerable to that, especially around digital transactions. Protecting the trading parties against cyber threats, there's a very significant challenge. And what does it involve? Is it about training the population? Because the average person who will be trading digitally does not quite appreciate, or some of the limitations that may make them not to want to trade digitally is around, is their money safe on the digital space? So having a robust cybersecurity measures and cooperation amongst members to deal with this is a very significant threat, and that's quite some work that we really need to do. And knowing that those who are involved in cybersecurity threats are always ahead of any emerging technology. So how do we catch up with them and get ahead of them? The fourth one would be the literacy around digital trade. What would be the proportion right now if you check the digital literacy deepening? And most traders are not those people we will say are trained in the digital stuff or have been educated. It's the likes of you and I, the mama mbogas, and the borders. So digital literacy need to be deepened amongst the business people, amongst consumers, for us to really move towards a digital economy eventually. And I think my last observation or point would be around verification and compliance. Ensuring that, Paul, I don't know what you'd say about this, because I was listening to you around the rules of origin. How do you verify and then ensure there's compliance to rules of origin criteria, especially where we are talking about the need for substantial information and value addition within the member states. I wonder, it might be a little bit easier for goods, physical goods or so, but how do you verify, how do you ascertain that this particular digital service has been substantially transformed within or among the member states? So that is something that we're still a long way. I think listening to you and given all these challenges I'm raising, we probably would be a long way to moving towards a digital economy. And I think we need to start creating programs around these challenges so that the opportunities you mentioned do not just remain opportunities, but there are things that we can actually take advantage of. Thank you so much. Oh, I didn't say I'm Victor Gallo from Kenya Private Sector Alliance, the Deputy CEO. Over back to you, please. Back to you. I'm done. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Mr. Ogalo. Maybe I give opportunity to Mr. Baker to react on some things that you raised. Thank you.
Yeah, hi. I'll just speak to a few of them, and I think everything you've raised is indeed something that needs to be considered and very important. The backbone infrastructure, of course, is critical. There are a lot of projects, I think, trying to improve the digital infrastructure, but it's so vast indeed. It requires a lot of investments. The One Network Alliance is also the ability for the sharing of joint infrastructure as well to take place. So they are making, the region is trying to move in the right direction to optimize what it's got, but I think it needs to go beyond that. And, you make a good point on that. With regard to the regulatory environment, there have been regulatory audits carried out by GIZ and the EU in preparing for the AFCFTA negotiations. So a stock-taking exercise was already done, particularly for trade and services and trading goods. But it also includes, I think, elements of the digital economy. So we can see a little bit the non-alignment that exists across the region. Efforts are being made. I think, there are some very good, as I say, African Union level initiatives that are taking place. There is the understanding of the need to align. But the problem will be on the implementation. So I think countries are adopting common frameworks, but because they will unevenly implement it, there will still be the distrust of consumer protection in a third market. It's the same problem we're facing in other areas of the AFCFTA as well. For example, with currency convertibilities, it's also very problematic for engaging in trade. So I think, there is still, as you say, a lot of work that's needed in that. I won't talk about cyber security threats, but you're quite right, that's an issue. I think the last point on rules of origin, I personally don't, apart from it becoming a complete nightmare in terms of compliance, I don't see how you can prove that all of the intellectual value added of a transmission that's embodied in transmission has been created locally, because you would have to have a trace of all the other transactions taking place. So if I'm working with a firm in Singapore and a Singaporean firm has provided some specific inputs into it, I would need to calculate what is their share of input into the final delivery of the product. It's easier with physical products, but when it comes to this, it would be very difficult. So I don't see how it's feasible without becoming very, very complicated and costly for businesses to do all these kinds of audits. So I think it would be a mistake personally to try and do that. But I know it's the way that some African countries wish to move. That's it from me. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Baker. Yes, Ogalo, karibu.
Yeah, I'm back. Thanks a lot, Paul. And you really touch on my concern, because if you're trying to replicate rules of origin as we have traditionally drawn them for physical goods. When it comes to digital services, digital products, the rules of origins need to be rethought because there's a lot of globalization on digital services that we really need to appreciate. Otherwise, it might be a nightmare of a barrier, of a trade barrier, trying to restrict that a digital service has to be wholly produced within Africa when even the technology in the first place may not be there. We might want to borrow some technology from China, you mix it with some from Europe for you to really get what you call an African hybrid of all those. So just careful that even as we look at these protocols, we do need to appreciate the fact that digital services are quite globally integrated, and we do not need to create trade barriers around them with the rules of origin that are not tenable. Yeah, and that's all I needed to add. And it's upon the business community to make those points in what is the feasibility of that protocol on rules of origin. Yes, thanks.
Yes, Becca, welcome.
Sorry, I couldn't resist with Victor. I don't want to get into too much of a technical discussion on rules of origin, but there is, I think, two other aspects here. One is that you're basically taxing ideas that come from outside the continent. That would be the idea of introducing. So it's a bit like taxing ICT products. Now in the protocol, clearly the idea is not to tax ICT products. So the idea is to actually obtain technology that might come from outside the continent, but not to apply duties on that, because there's a recognition on the continent that we need to get access to the technology to be able to drive change. So the same thing would happen in this area if we're trying to tax differently things that come from outside the continent. The danger is that it will indeed create barriers and it will become very difficult, because we need interactions with the rest of the world often in when we're delivering the service. The other thing is so what would it mean, a back office operation that is currently in Mauritius that does insurance services? It would presumably, the value added is primarily if it's a back office operation of a bank, a German bank based in Mauritius, they would, if they ever then transact with Botswana, presumably most of the value added is coming from Germany. So what we are proposing is to actually apply perhaps duties between Mauritius and Botswana. And so that also will affect intra-continental trade for BPO services, which are very low value added transactions, right? So more than likely you wouldn't meet the rules of origin under the BPO. So that will then limit again intra-regional trade. So yeah, you're absolutely right. It needs a real thought and it needs to come from the private sector as to what those positions should be rather than just from government, I think. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Mr. Becker. Maybe just to appreciate the presence of those who have been there on the chat. Pesapal, I see Regional X Consulting Limited, Mukwano, Greenfield Holdings, Pesapal Tanzania, Bidco Oil, and I've also seen AfriTrack. And yes, I've also seen DHL from Tanzania, and I also would like to recognize the presence of Ihari from EU Commission, and also maybe just to tell you to be free to comment, and I would like to hear more from those who have any insights about how we can do this e-commerce platform for all the EAC e-commerce platforms. So feel free to react, just write on the chat, or maybe just raise your hand up to give us the comments on how can we do this together. And I would also like to welcome EU if they have any comment or just saying hello to the participants. Yes, Harry, thank you very much. Please welcome and give us your views. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do you hear me, everyone? Okay.
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
So I don't have questions, in fact, but rather comments. So I am a consultant who is working with the EU delegations for assessing the situation of e-commerce and e-payments in the 8 countries of the East African community. And I have been traveling in 5 of the 8 countries in the past months. So this is rather a comment and not a question. What I remarked in some of the, I would say, the more advanced countries is that for some of them, the infrastructure is already there. We could say that for countries like Kenya, Uganda, and to some extent Tanzania, you have payment systems that are well developed. And so what seems to remain is really a question of trust and a question of culture in how people slowly come to use digital commerce. When I say this, I mean for essentially urban communities who are able to have access to internet. So I would like very much to have the advices of others on this subject. And the other thing that I discovered was that given that e-commerce was not really yet developed within each of the countries, promoting cross-border e-commerce is very much still something that needs to be mid-term rather than something that can be pursued immediately. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ihari, for your presence here. Maybe I also welcome anybody else with a comment or reaction. People from DHL, from data systems, even the international organizations that are here, we welcome you for any views. Okay, thank you very much. Silence means there is no any further comments, and I would like now to welcome Ms. Angelique for any closing remarks before we welcome our acting executive director for closing this meeting. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for this opportunity. And on behalf of Mr. Adrian Zhao, the Acting Executive Director of the East Africa Business Council, who has got another engagement at this time, we would like to appreciate your time and your presence in this very important meeting where we are now beginning our e-commerce at EAC level, and I would like also to appreciate Mr. Becker, the presenter during this discussion. And also like to appreciate the presence of the GIZ EU team and all the international organizations that are present. Also, I appreciate the e-commerce leaders present from different e-commerce platforms and those others that are present. And just a few remarks from Mr. Adrian Zhao. He has said that he really appreciates for your views and presence here. And as the East African Business Council is the voice of private sector, we are really happy to host the e-commerce community for the e-commerce platforms, and that will also enable us to give the views. And I think we have also had the observation from